Through the white fury of an Idaho blizzard, a retired Navy SEAL spotted a broken guardrail above a silent ravine. Below it, an elderly couple lay trapped inside a pickup, slowly filling with snow. While Shane Porter climbed toward the road for help, his aging K9, Ash, pressed his body against the shattered window and refused to leave the frightened woman. But saving Roscoe and Wilma Dale was only the beginning. Their orchard stood in the path of a communications road the mountain desperately needed, and the cheapest solution would ask two old people to lose the most. What followed forced neighbors, a powerful company, and one wounded man to decide whether progress could be built without abandoning mercy. Tell us where you are watching from, share your thoughts, and please like and subscribe to help SEAL K9 Tales reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Morning came clean and bright over Elk River Pass. Fresh snow rested along the dark pines and the sloping roof of Shane Porter's cabin, softening every hard edge the mountain possessed. Under the pale Idaho sun, the frozen world looked almost forgiving. The air was so clear that Shane could see the distant ridgeline from his back steps, each white summit sharpened against a sky of impossible blue. He stood there with a mug cooling between both hands. At 53, Shane still carried the solid frame of the Navy SEAL he had once been, though time had changed the way he wore his strength. His shoulders remained broad beneath an olive thermal shirt, but he no longer moved with the restless readiness of a younger man. Now his movements were measured, economical, as though every gesture had first passed through an internal checkpoint. His chestnut brown hair had grown longer than military regulations would ever have allowed, brushed loosely back from a wide forehead. Silver showed clearly at both temples. A few days of brown and gray stubble softened the angles of his long face, while his nose bent slightly left from an old break he rarely remembered receiving. Ash waited beside the steps. The 8-year-old German shepherd stood in the snow, with his black saddle dark against the warm honey-gold fur of his chest and legs. A small triangular notch marked the outer edge of his right ear. His muzzle had begun turning silver, more heavily on the left side, giving him the expression of a patient old guard who had seen enough foolishness to stop being surprised by it. "Inside," Shane said. Ash looked toward the woods. That wasn't a discussion. The dog turned slowly and climbed the steps, favoring his right hind leg only slightly. Shane noticed. He always noticed. Inside the cabin, a cast-iron stove clicked as it warmed. Shane set his mug beside a bottle of anti-inflammatory tablets marked with Ash's name. He had just opened the cap when his phone began vibrating across the kitchen table. The name on the screen stopped him. Elaine. For 3 rings, he did nothing. He had once known the rhythm of her footsteps in every room of their house. He had known how she took her coffee, which songs she hummed when anxious, and the exact crease that appeared above her nose whenever she caught him pretending everything was fine. Yet somewhere between deployments, sleepless nights, and apologies offered too late, Shane had lost the ability to speak to her about anything that mattered. The phone continued vibrating. Ash sat near the table and watched him. Shane's thumb hovered above the screen. He imagined answering. He imagined Elaine saying hello in that careful tone people used near an injured animal. He imagined the silence that would follow when she waited for him to become someone he had never learned how to be. The screen went dark. The cabin seemed quieter afterward. Shane placed the phone face down, gave Ash his medicine inside a piece of dried meat, and told himself he would call back after returning from town. He did not believe himself. By early afternoon, he had loaded 2 fuel cans into the bed of his pickup and helped Ash into the passenger side using the low handle on the dog's blue-gray harness. The day still looked harmless. Sunlight flashed from the snowbanks, and smoke rose straight from the few chimneys scattered along the lower road. At the general store, Shane bought kerosene, batteries, coffee, and another month of Ash's joint medication. The clerk mentioned a pressure system moving down from the north. "Supposed to miss us," she said. Shane glanced through the front window. Clouds had already begun closing over the western ridge. "Storms don't read forecasts," he replied. The first flake struck the windshield before he reached the upper pass. Within 20 minutes, the blue sky had vanished. Wind drove snow sideways across the road, erasing tire tracks almost as soon as they appeared. Shane slowed the truck and leaned forward, one hand steady on the wheel. Ash sat upright beside him, ears angled toward the shifting sound outside. Survey crews had been working along that stretch for several days. Shane had seen their orange markers and the heavy tracks their utility vehicles left near the shoulder. Now drifting snow filled those ruts until the edge of the road looked smooth and solid. It was neither. Ash suddenly lifted his head. Shane felt the change before the dog made a sound. His body went still. His nose pointed toward the right side of the road. "What is it?" Ash gave one short, low whine. Then Shane saw the broken guardrail. 2 wooden posts had been snapped outward. Splinters lay scattered over the snow, pale and fresh. Beyond them, the slope dropped sharply toward a stand of young fir trees. Shane stopped the pickup, switched on the hazard lights, and stepped into the storm. The wind struck him hard enough to steal his first breath. He pulled on gloves, clipped a leash to Ash's harness, and moved toward the break in the rail. A dark shape lay below. An older pickup had rolled onto its passenger side and come to rest against a bank of snow and brush. One headlight still glowed beneath the drift, casting a weak yellow stain through the white air. Shane descended sideways, planting each boot before transferring his weight. Ash moved close, nails digging into the slope. Halfway down, Shane heard metal groan. Then a woman screamed. He reached the driver's side, now facing upward, and climbed onto the exposed door. Through the fractured window, he saw an elderly man twisted behind the wheel. The man's coat was torn at one shoulder, and his right arm hung at an unnatural angle across his chest. Below him, against the shattered passenger window, an older woman struggled beneath a seat belt that had locked tight across her body. "Don't move," Shane called. "My name's Shane. I'm getting you out." The driver's face was broad and weathered, with a thick silver mustache and blue eyes narrowed against pain. "Roscoe Dale," he managed. "That's my wife, Wilma." Wilma did not answer. Her gray-brown hair had come loose from a metal clip shaped like an apple leaf. Blood marked one side of her forehead, but the wound was shallow. The greater danger was in her breathing. It came too quickly. Each breath catching before the next had room to begin. The wind pushed through the broken glass beside her. Snow gathered on her cardigan and in the folds of her coat. "Wilma?" Shane lowered his voice. "Look at me." Her amber-brown eyes moved toward him, but did not settle. "The truck's moving," she whispered. "It's not moving." "It is. I can hear it." The metal frame complained again under the wind. Shane understood. Telling her she was safe would mean nothing while every sound insisted otherwise. He secured a rescue strap around the upper door frame, then climbed through the driver's window. The cabin smelled of antifreeze, blood, and cold upholstery. He checked Roscoe first. The older man's breathing was painful, but steady. His shoulder was likely dislocated, possibly fractured. Shane stabilized the arm against his body using a folded blanket and part of the torn seat cover. "You a medic?" Roscoe asked through clenched teeth. "No." "You tie knots like one." "I've had practice." "Good. I've had enough amateurs today." Even injured, the old man's dry tone remained intact. Shane crawled lower toward Wilma. Her pulse raced beneath his fingers. He placed another blanket across her chest, but the wind kept lifting its edge. Ash appeared at the broken passenger window. Wilma's eyes found him. For one suspended moment, her breathing changed, not slower, but interrupted by surprise. "That dog," she said. "Ash." The German shepherd pressed his muzzle near the opening. Snow settled along his black back. Wilma lifted a trembling hand. Her fingers could not quite reach him. Shane looked at the slope, the road above, and the phone in his pocket. No signal. The truck sat too low beneath the ridge, and the local radio repeater could not reach into every hollow along the pass. He carried a VHF handheld unit in his own pickup for that reason, but even it might need height. He fastened the blanket more securely around Wilma. "I have to climb back to the road and call for help." Her eyes widened immediately. "No. I'll come back." "No, please." The word broke apart with her next breath. Shane knew that fear, not the ordinary fear of pain or death, but the terror of being left while the world became unrecognizable. Elaine had once told him his silences felt exactly like that, a door closing while she was still speaking. He turned toward Ash. The dog was already watching Wilma. Shane unclipped the leash and pointed toward the broken window. "Stay." Ash did not look at him. He climbed closer to the opening and lowered his body against the exposed side of the pickup, placing his broad chest across the gap where the wind entered. Wilma's fingers disappeared into the thick fur at his neck. Ash settled his weight into the snow. His slow breathing became visible in the cold air. Rise, fall, rise, fall. Without anyone instructing her, Wilma began following it. Shane remained there for another second, watching the old woman hold the dog as if she had found the only steady thing left in the storm. Then he climbed. The slope had grown slick. Twice his boots slid backward. By the time he reached the road, ice had formed along his stubble, and the silver at his temples was wet with snow. He ran to his pickup, retrieved the VHF radio and a length of coaxial cable, then connected the handheld unit to the truck's roof antenna. Static filled the channel. "County Road Service, this is Porter at Upper Elk River Pass. Vehicle rollover below mile marker 18. 2 injured adults. Do you copy?" Only static answered. He tried again. The wind tore half the words from his mouth. "County Road Service, rollover below mile marker 18. Need medical response? Do you copy?" Nothing. Shane climbed onto the running board, raising the radio as high as the cable allowed. The storm reduced the world to 10 yards of moving white. Somewhere beneath him, Wilma waited inside twisted metal. Ash lay in the snow against a broken window. Shane pictured the dog's stiffening hind leg and felt urgency sharpen into anger. At the weather, the dead signal, the years he had spent convincing himself that leaving was sometimes the same as surviving. He pressed the transmitter again. "This is Shane Porter. 2 civilians trapped. 1 male with shoulder and possible rib injuries. 1 female with head trauma and respiratory distress. Mile marker 18, East Slope. Anyone receiving, respond." A burst of static cracked through the speaker. Then a voice, faint and broken. "Porter, this is Rourke. Repeat location." Shane closed his eyes once. "Glenn, mile marker 18. Pick up down the east slope. Guardrail is broken. Bring medical and extraction gear." Glenn Rourke's voice returned through the interference, rough with age and years of diesel fumes. "Copy 18. I'm 6 miles south in the county plow. I'll relay to Nora and lead them in. Stay on channel." Shane disconnected the cable, secured the radio inside his jacket, and descended again. Ash had not moved. Snow covered his shoulders and collected in the notch of his right ear. Wilma's face was close to his neck. Her eyes were shut, but her breathing had slowed. Roscoe watched them from above. "That your dog?" he asked. "Yes." "He always ignore bad weather?" "Only when somebody needs him." Roscoe gave a strained grunt that might have been a laugh. It took Glenn's snowplow nearly 30 minutes to reach the broken guardrail. The ambulance followed in its cleared tracks, accompanied by Nora Keswick and 2 volunteer rescue workers. Nora descended first, compact and sure-footed, in a brick-red rescue parka. Her dark bob had escaped beneath her hood, and her radio was clipped high on her left shoulder. She took one look inside the truck and began assigning tasks without raising her voice. Shane stepped back. That was harder than entering the wreck. For years, usefulness had been the closest thing he possessed to peace. But Nora knew the equipment, the crew, and the evacuation route. Shane held the stabilization strap and answered questions while other hands worked. Roscoe came out first, protesting every movement and asking whether anyone had remembered his toolbox. Wilma was lifted through the upper window on a rigid board. The moment the rescuers moved her away from the truck, her hand reached blindly toward Ash. The dog tried to stand, his front leg straightened, but his right hind leg remained locked beneath him. He faltered and sank back into the snow. Shane was beside him immediately. Easy. Ash tried again, stubbornness tightening every muscle along his back. No. Shane knelt, one knee sinking into the drift. He placed both gloved hands around the dog's hip and began rubbing warmth slowly into the stiff joint. Ash looked past him toward Wilma. "She's safe," Shane said. "You did enough." The words felt strange in his mouth, perhaps because he had never believed them when spoken about himself. Ash finally let his weight rest against Shane's chest. For several seconds, the former SEAL remained kneeling in the storm, sheltering the dog who had spent the last hour sheltering someone else. When Ash could stand, Shane supported his hindquarters using the harness handle and guided him toward the road. At the ambulance, Wilma lay beneath heated blankets. Her face had regained some color. As Shane approached, she opened her hand. A small tuft of honey gold and black fur rested between her fingers. "Ash," she whispered. The dog lifted his head. Wilma gave the faintest smile before the doors closed. The ambulance followed Glenn's plow down the pass, red lights fading into the snow. Shane stood beside his pickup with one hand on Ash's back. Beyond the road, across a white field and rows of bare apple trees, he could just make out a small wooden chapel. It stood beneath the pale afternoon sky, its roof buried in snow, its bell silent above the door. Shane watched it until the storm hid it from view. 3 days after the accident, Roscoe Dale was released from Elk River Community Clinic wearing a sling, a rib brace, and the expression of a man personally offended by every medical instruction he had received. He stood beneath the clinic awning while light snow fell through the pale morning sun. His silver mustache twitched as he studied the discharge papers. "It says no lifting," he muttered. Shane took the small canvas bag from his uninjured hand. "Then don't lift anything. It also says no driving." "That one seems especially reasonable." Roscoe glanced toward Shane's pickup. "You always this cheerful?" "Only before breakfast." Ash sat near Shane's left leg, wearing his blue-gray harness. His right ear leaned slightly outward in the cold, the small notch along its edge visible against the snow. He had recovered from the stiffness brought on by the rescue, though Shane had shortened his walks and doubled the care with which he watched the dog climb into the truck. Roscoe's mouth shifted, as if he were resisting a smile. Wilma had not been discharged with him. A concussion, bruised ribs, and a deep strain through her hip had made recovery slower. The panic attacks concerned Dr. Meredith Sloan almost as much as the physical injuries. Wilma had been moved from the main clinic into a 6-room rehabilitation wing connected by a glass corridor where she could receive physical therapy without being sent all the way to Boise. Shane had not intended to visit her. He had come only to return the canvas handbag found beneath the crushed passenger seat. The bag contained a wallet, a folded grocery list, a broken pair of reading glasses, and a small notebook with a green cloth cover. Returning it seemed like the sort of task that had a clear beginning and end. Then Ash stopped outside the rehabilitation corridor. The dog's body went still. From behind a closed door came the faint scrape of a chair, followed by a woman's breath catching too quickly. Ash looked at Shane. No, the dog remained where he was. Ash? His amber eyes moved toward the door again. Shane had spent enough years beside him to recognize the difference between disobedience and concern. Ash was not pulling forward or making noise. He simply refused to walk away. A nurse approached from the station, her shoes whispering against the polished floor. She looked at the German shepherd, then at Shane. Animals aren't allowed in the rehab wing. Understood. Shane shortened the leash and turned. Ash did not move. The nurse folded her arms. Is he a certified service animal? No. Therapy dog? No. That makes this simpler. A calm voice answered from behind her. Not necessarily. Dr. Meredith Sloan stepped from Wilma's room, closing the door softly behind her. She was 58, with silver blonde hair cut neatly at the jaw and a face that seemed composed of clear decisions. Her white coat was unbuttoned over a burgundy sweater, and a pair of reading glasses rested on a chain against her chest. She looked first at Ash, not Shane. That's the dog from the accident? Yes. Meredith crouched just enough to observe him without reaching toward his head. Ash watched her, neither retreating nor seeking attention. Vaccinations current? Shane nodded. Records are in the truck. Flea and tick treatment? Yes. Any history of aggression? Only toward people who ask too many questions. Meredith raised an eyebrow. That was a joke, Shane said. I was hoping. From inside the room came another uneven breath. Meredith straightened. Mrs. Dale has been asking about him. Shane looked toward the door. She remembers? She remembers the dog more clearly than she remembers parts of the extraction. The doctor studied Shane for a moment longer. He is not a medical treatment. He is not a substitute for therapy, medication, or supervision. If I allow him in, it will be for 10 minutes, in a private room, with you controlling him at all times. Shane nodded. And if he shows stress, agitation, or fatigue, the visit ends. Agreed, Meredith pointed toward the leash. Clean his paws first. Inside, Wilma sat near the window in a high-backed chair, a blanket across her lap. Her gray-brown hair had been trimmed where blood had dried near her temple, and the apple-leaf clip now held back only one side. Without her winter coat and the violence of the wreck around her, she appeared smaller than Shane remembered. Yet her eyes were alert. They moved past him immediately. Ash? The dog entered slowly. Wilma's fingers tightened around the blanket. Shane saw her shoulders rise as the radiator beneath the window gave a metallic knock. Her breathing shortened. Ash did not rush to her. He approached in a small curve, sniffed the edge of the blanket, then lowered himself beside the chair. When Wilma did not reach for him, he rested his chin on the side of her knee. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden smile. No miraculous release of grief. Wilma simply looked down at the weight of his head against her leg. After a while, her shoulders lowered. The room grew quiet enough for Shane to hear the small clock above the sink. He stayed, she whispered. Shane knew she meant the accident. Yes. Even when you left. I ordered him to. Wilma's eyes remained on Ash. That isn't why he stayed. Shane did not answer. The 10-minute visit became 15, only because Meredith returned, observed Wilma's pulse and breathing, and chose not to interrupt. When Shane finally called Ash to his feet, Wilma's hand slid from the dog's neck reluctantly. Will you bring him again? Shane had learned long ago that promises carried more weight than people admitted. I can bring him Thursday. Wilma nodded, accepting the exactness of the answer. Outside the room, Meredith handed Shane a photocopied sheet of facility guidelines. You understand this is not a formal animal-assisted therapy program. I do. She responded well, but responses vary. Tomorrow she may feel worse. I understand that too. Meredith glanced through the narrow window in the door. Mrs. Dale is frightened by sounds she cannot control. Metal carts, wind against the vents, doors closing unexpectedly. The dog gives her something physical and predictable to focus on. Shane folded the paper once. Breathing, warmth, weight. Yes, he knew those things. Ash had done the same for him after nights when sleep ended with Shane on the cabin floor, certain for several seconds that he was somewhere else. Meredith seemed to notice something in his face, but did not ask. I'll see you Thursday, she said. Roscoe was waiting in the clinic cafe, stirring coffee with his left hand and spilling half of it into the saucer. Shane placed Wilma's canvas bag on the table. Roscoe opened it and checked the contents. Glasses are broken. The truck landed on them. Poor craftsmanship. Shane sat opposite him. Ash settled beneath the table. For a few moments, Roscoe said nothing. His usual irritability thinned, leaving behind simple exhaustion. She asked about the orchard, he said at last. What about it? Whether I'd checked the pipes, whether the packing house roof held, whether I'd fed the barn cat. He gave a quiet breath. Woman can barely stand, and she's worried about a cat that hates both of us. Did you feed it? I'm injured, not suicidal. I left food by the door. Roscoe looked toward the window, where snow rested in bright lines along the parked cars. Frost Lantern's been ours 39 years. Bought it with 12 acres, a dying irrigation pump, and no idea what we were doing. He described the orchard without sentimentality, which made the affection beneath his words more visible. There were 6 rows of old Macintosh trees, newer Honeycrisps near the south fence, a packing house with a stove that smoked in east winds, and a wooden chapel built before Roscoe's father was born. The chapel belonged to a church? Shane asked. No denomination owns it. Never did. Folks built it together around 1911. Weddings, funerals, storm shelter, food drives. Half the valley's been married or mourned in that room. Roscoe lifted the coffee cup, winced, and set it down again. Wilma keeps the door unlocked in winter. That seems risky. Only thing anyone ever stole was a coffee tin. A full one? Empty, which was insulting. Shane looked down as Ash shifted beneath the table, placing his muzzle across one of Shane's boots. Roscoe's humor faded. A company wants a road through the upper orchard. What company? Northline Signal. County hired them to put up a communications tower. Shane remembered the survey tracks buried beneath the snow near the accident site. Those were their vehicles on the pass? Survey subcontractor, far as I know, not saying they caused the wreck. Snow did most of the work. I did the rest. The admission cost him something. Roscoe explained that he had signed a preliminary survey authorization 2 months earlier. Trevor Miles, Northline's regional director, had presented it as permission to measure grades and inspect the old logging route beside the orchard. I thought they'd walk the hill, draw their maps, and leave, Roscoe said. Then the red stakes started showing up closer to the chapel. Did the paper define the survey corridor? Probably. You read it? Roscoe looked offended. I read parts? The large parts? The parts that weren't written by cowards. Shane leaned back. It was not his land. Not his contract, not his fight. That recognition should have brought relief. Instead, he remembered Wilma's hand closing around Ash's fur and the exact way she had said, he stayed. On Thursday, Shane returned, then again on Saturday. The visits developed a quiet rhythm. Wilma practiced moving from the chair to a walker while Ash rested several feet away. She did not clutch him during every anxious moment. Meredith taught her to identify 5 things she could see, 4 she could touch, 3 she could hear. Ash became one of those points of reference, not the entire method. Sometimes Wilma spoke. She told Shane the orchard had once produced enough apples to fill 3 trucks each autumn. Now they sold mostly through local markets and winter preserves. The chapel had sheltered stranded motorists during the blizzard of 1996 and served soup after a wildfire forced families from the lower valley. "People think a small place survives because it's valuable," she said. "Usually it survives because someone keeps sweeping the floor." Ash's ear flicked at her voice. Wilma smiled faintly. "He understands housekeeping better than Roscoe." On the 6th day, Trevor Miles arrived. He did not look like a man who enjoyed hospital corridors. He was lean, slightly stooped, and dressed in a steel blue shirt beneath a graphite technical jacket. Silver threaded through his dark hair near the temples. A tablet with an orange-edged case rested beneath one arm, while a narrow folder occupied the other hand. He paused when he saw Ash beside Wilma's chair. "That the dog from the rollover?" "Yes," Wilma said. Trevor looked at Shane, then back to Wilma. "I'm glad you're recovering." His tone was formal but not false. Roscoe, seated near the window with his sling, gave a dry laugh. "You came to admire the miracle of modern medicine?" "I came because the response deadline is next Monday." Trevor placed the folder on the side table. Inside were a revised compensation offer, notice of the project schedule, and authorization for geotechnical testing. He explained that Northline was working under contract with the Elk River County Communications District. The tower would cover several dead zones across the pass, including the section where Roscoe and Wilma had crashed. "The current access route uses the old timber road," Trevor said. "Widening it is less disruptive than cutting a completely new road through County Rock." "Less disruptive to your budget," Roscoe replied. Trevor did not deny it. "Also faster. The county wants the tower operational before next winter." He turned several pages toward them. The proposed route ran along the orchard's upper edge, close enough to the chapel that construction would remove part of the old windbreak and several mature trees. Roscoe reached for the pen clipped inside the folder. Shane placed 2 fingers on the paper and slid it beyond his reach. Roscoe glared. "I can still sign my name." "I know." "Then move your hand." "When the pain medication is out of your system and somebody who understands this language has read it." Trevor's expression tightened. "It is only permission for soil testing." "It also extends the survey corridor," Shane said, reading the marked boundary, "and acknowledges receipt of the revised route. That does not transfer an easement." "Then waiting 48 hours won't hurt you." For the first time, Trevor looked at Shane as more than a visitor with a dog. "We already lost 6 weeks to environmental review." "That sounds inconvenient." "It can become dangerous." The room changed slightly. Trevor opened the map on his tablet. Red circles marked sections of Elk River Pass where emergency calls regularly failed. He listed 3 vehicle accidents, a missing hunter, and a cardiac emergency delayed because the nearest working signal lay 11 miles away. "These are not theoretical problems," he said. "Your accident is the most recent example." Roscoe's anger dimmed, though it did not disappear. Trevor was using their suffering to strengthen his argument, but the argument remained true. After he left, the folder stayed unopened on the table. Roscoe stared toward the snowy window. Wilma ran one hand slowly over Ash's neck. "I want that tower built," she said. Both men looked at her. She continued before Roscoe could object. "I want Glenn to reach people before their fuel runs out. I want Nora to know where an ambulance is going. I don't want another woman lying in a broken truck waiting to find out whether the mountain feels merciful." Roscoe's jaw tightened. "Then what are we arguing about?" Wilma looked at the map Trevor had left behind. "The road." Her voice remained gentle, but the room seemed to gather around it. They want the cheapest path because it is easiest to explain on a budget. That does not mean it is the only path. She lowered her hand into Ash's thick fur. I am not asking the valley to stay unsafe so we can keep every tree. Then she looked at Shane. But safety should not always begin by asking the oldest people in the room what they are willing to lose. No one answered. Outside, sunlight spread across the rehabilitation courtyard, turning the snow almost painfully bright. Ash closed his eyes beneath Wilma's hand. For the first time since the accident, Shane understood that the problem waiting beyond the clinic doors would not have a clean side to stand on. And that, more than danger, was what made it difficult to walk away. Wilma Dale came home beneath a sky so bright that the snow seemed to cast its own light. Nearly 3 weeks had passed since the accident. The road into Frost Lantern Orchard had been plowed to a narrow white corridor between rows of bare apple trees. Their branches reached over the drifts like dark hands, each twig carrying a thin silver edge of frost. Shane drove slowly to keep the truck from jolting over the frozen ruts. Roscoe sat in the passenger seat with his right arm still secured against his chest, criticizing every turn as if he had been appointed by the state of Idaho to supervise the proper use of steering wheels. You're too far left. There's a snowbank on the right. Snowbanks are soft? Guardrails are softer than they look. Roscoe went quiet for several seconds. That was unnecessary. In the back seat, Wilma hid a smile behind one gloved hand. She was still pale from the weeks indoors, and a folding walker rested beside her. Ash sat near her knees, his honey-gold chest rising steadily beneath his harness. When the orchard house appeared, Wilma leaned closer to the window. It was an old white farmhouse with a green metal roof, broad enough to have survived many winters, but modest enough to admit it had never been wealthy. Behind it stood the weathered packing house, its loading doors facing the orchard. Farther up the slope, the wooden chapel rested beneath the trees, small and square, with a narrow bell frame rising from its roof. Roscoe looked at the house and stopped complaining. Shane parked near the porch. He helped Wilma down first, careful not to move faster than she did. She placed both hands on the walker and stood in the snow for a moment, looking toward the orchard as if checking whether it had continued to exist without her. A gray barn cat watched from beneath the porch. "There you are," Wilma whispered. The cat turned and disappeared through a gap in the foundation. Roscoe climbed down with less grace and more confidence than his injuries justified. "I told you he was alive." "You said you left food." "I did." "In the bag?" Roscoe frowned. "There was supposed to be a bowl." Shane carried the luggage inside before the discussion became an inquiry into agricultural neglect. He had planned to stay until evening. The furnace disagreed. It coughed twice when Roscoe turned it on, released a smell like burned dust, and stopped completely. The packing house door had also warped during the storm, leaving a gap large enough for snow to blow across the floor. A section of gutter hung loose above the kitchen entrance. Shane took off his navy field jacket, revealing the olive combat shirt beneath it, and opened his toolbox. "I'll fix the furnace and brace the packing house door." Roscoe lowered himself into a chair. "That all?" "That's what I said." "The pump in the south shed makes a noise." "What kind of noise?" "A bad one." "That narrows it down." Wilma sat near the front window with a blanket over her knees. Ash lay beside the chair, his notched right ear angled toward her whenever she shifted. By sunset, the furnace was running. By the next afternoon, the packing house door closed properly. On the third day, Shane replaced a cracked pipe in the washroom, tightened the porch rail, and discovered that Roscoe's bad noise was a loose belt on the orchard pump. On the fifth morning, Roscoe watched Shane splitting firewood behind the house. Shane worked in an even rhythm, placing each log upright, striking once, then stacking the pieces by size against the shed wall. Roscoe stood nearby, wearing a brown canvas coat and the faded trucker cap with the Apple emblem, his injured arm still held close. "You split wood like you're clearing a hostile building." Shane planted another log. "The wood hasn't complained." "It would if it had standards." "What am I doing wrong?" "Too straight. No personality." "It's firewood." "That attitude is why city people buy decorative logs." Shane looked at him. "I'm not from a city." "Then you have less excuse." From the kitchen window, Wilma laughed. The sound was soft and brief, but it stopped both men. They had not heard it since before the accident. Ash lifted his head from the porch. Wilma opened the door and held out a thin slice of dried apple. "Ash!" The dog rose immediately. "No," Shane said. Ash continued toward her. "He's had breakfast. This is fruit. It still counts." Wilma handed Ash the slice. He took it with the solemn dignity of a creature accepting a medal. "He looks thin," she said. "He has gained 2 pounds. Winter weight. He has arthritis. Then he needs comfort. He needs restraint." Roscoe nodded toward Ash. "Dog seems to have chosen his medical team?" Shane pretended not to see Wilma reach into her cardigan pocket for a second slice. That evening, however, he reduced Ash's dinner slightly and added warm water to the dog's joint medication. Ash stared at the bowl, then at Shane with quiet betrayal. "You made your choice," Shane told him. The days settled into something Shane did not recognize at first because it lacked urgency. There were no radios crackling, no injuries to stabilize, no storm demanding decisions. There was coffee in the kitchen before sunrise. Roscoe argued with the weather forecast. Wilma wrote appointments in her green cloth notebook and rested when Dr. Meredith had instructed her to rest, though she complained that healing involved an unreasonable amount of sitting. Shane repaired what needed repairing, then he found other things. He told himself each task would be the last before he returned to his cabin. The orchard kept producing one more. On the 7th morning, Ash began barking toward the upper rows. Not the sharp warning bark he used in danger. It was lower, irregular, more irritated than alarmed. Shane stepped from the packing house and followed the dog between the trees. Snow had fallen lightly during the night. Across the white ground, a line of red survey stakes now ran through the orchard. The color was almost violent against the winter landscape. Several stakes followed the old track near the north fence. Others stood much closer to the mature apple trees, their red plastic ribbons snapping in the wind. One had been planted less than 20 feet from the chapel steps. Roscoe appeared behind Shane. For 1 second, the old man said nothing. Then he walked toward the nearest stake. "What are you doing?" Shane asked. "Improving the scenery." Roscoe caught the stake with his left hand and pulled. Shane stepped between him and the marker. "Leave it." "Move?" "No. It's my land. And possibly an authorized survey corridor." They put one beside the chapel. "Then we document it." Roscoe's face reddened beneath the winter cold. "You think taking pictures will make them care?" "It will establish where the stakes were placed before anyone moves them." "I know where they were placed. I'm standing here." "You'll need more than that." Roscoe tried to step around him. Shane did not touch him, but neither did he move. The difference in size made the confrontation look more threatening than it was. Shane lowered his voice. "If you pull them, Trevor can say you interfered with authorized work. If some are outside the corridor, removing them destroys the evidence." Roscoe stared at him. Wind shook the red ribbon beside them. Finally, the old man released the stake. "I hate it when you make sense." "I've noticed." Shane photographed every marker, measured distances from the fence and chapel, and compared the positions with the survey authorization Roscoe had signed. The document allowed preliminary work inside a defined strip along the old logging track. 3 stakes clearly stood outside it. Shane called Trevor. The Northline director arrived before noon in a gray utility vehicle, accompanied by 2 survey technicians. He wore a rust-colored shell over a charcoal sweater, his tablet tucked beneath one arm. Trevor checked the coordinates without argument. "These 3 are wrong," he said. Roscoe folded his good arm across his chest. "That your professional conclusion?" "It is?" Trevor ordered the technicians to remove the misplaced stakes and correct their field notes. He did not apologize dramatically. He simply acknowledged the error and had it fixed. The remaining markers stayed. "The base corridor is still within the signed authorization," Trevor said. "For surveying," Shane replied, "not construction." "I know the difference." Roscoe didn't. Trevor glanced toward the old man. "The document states it. In language designed for people who read land use contracts every day." Trevor's jaw tightened, but his attention shifted toward the chapel. "The preliminary route remains the most practical approach to the tower site." "Practical for whom?" Wilma asked. She had come slowly up the path with her walker, Ash beside her. The dog's pace matched hers without being commanded. Trevor removed his gloves before speaking to her, an unexpectedly respectful gesture. "For the project schedule, the terrain, and the available budget." Wilma looked at the red stakes. "That is not the same answer as saying it is the only route." Trevor did not respond immediately. "No," he said at last, "it isn't." He returned to his vehicle, leaving the corrected markers behind. Roscoe watched him drive away. "So there are other routes." "That's what he said," Shane replied. "No, he said this one was practical. Men use words like that when they want the alternatives to sound foolish." Wilma turned toward the house. "Then we should find out what the alternatives are." The filing cabinet stood in a small room behind the kitchen, surrounded by preserves, old calendars, and enough paper to suggest Wilma had never trusted anyone who promised records could be safely stored elsewhere. She opened the bottom drawer. Tax receipts were bundled by year. Property maps had been folded and refolded until the creases had softened like cloth. There were letters from the county, irrigation assessments, orchard invoices, and a yellowed timber permit bearing a date from more than 40 years earlier. Roscoe held up one sheet. "This proves the road belongs to us." Shane read it. "It proves you paid taxes. On the land." "Tax payments don't necessarily erase a right-of-way." Roscoe gave him a wounded look. "Whose side are you on?" "The side that doesn't lose because it misunderstood its own paperwork." Wilma sat at the table, tired but focused. "We need someone who knows what these mean." The county records office occupied the ground floor of an old brick courthouse in Elk River. 2 days later, Shane carried the files inside, while Ash remained in the truck with the heater running. Helen Whitcomb worked behind a long counter beneath rows of metal shelves. She was 62, narrow-faced, with silver hair pinned loosely at the back of her head. Half-moon glasses rested low on her nose. Her voice had the patient precision of someone who had spent decades correcting people who believed memory was a legal document. She examined the timber permit first. "This allowed commercial use of an existing track for 18 months, she said. "It did not create a permanent easement by itself." Roscoe leaned forward. "So Northline has no right to use it?" Helen held up one finger. "That is not what I said." She pulled several archived maps from a drawer. On one, the road was drawn as a dotted line. On another, it appeared as a solid access route. A later copy used a symbol that could mean seasonal use, maintenance access, or simply that the draftsman had run out of patience. "The county records are inconsistent," Helen said. "That happens more often than anyone likes to admit." "Can you decide which map controls?" Shane asked. "I can tell you what the documents say. I cannot determine the boundary on the ground or give you a legal conclusion. She wrote a name on a piece of paper. Caleb Stroud. Licensed land surveyor, mostly retired, still takes cases when they annoy him enough. Caleb met them the following afternoon at the orchard. He was 64 and tall in the narrow, slightly bent way of an old fence post. His beard was white and cropped close, while his weathered face carried the permanent squint of a man who had spent half his life looking through surveying instruments. He wore an orange wool cap, an olive work coat, and carried a tripod over one shoulder. He listened while Roscoe explained the situation, interrupting only when the story drifted from measurements into character judgments. "I remember this chapel," Caleb said after studying the slope. "You been here before?" Wilma asked. "Winter of 1988. Alternator died on the county road. Found the chapel unlocked, a blanket in the cabinet, and coffee that could have stripped paint." "That was Roscoe's coffee," Wilma said. Caleb nodded. "I assumed so." He agreed to inspect the boundaries and compare them with the archived records for far less than his usual fee. But before Roscoe could celebrate, Caleb pointed one gloved hand toward the red stakes. "Do not expect me to find a magical line that solves everything. Land records are built from old measurements, changed landmarks, copied errors, and people who died before anyone thought to ask better questions." "What can you tell us?" Shane asked. "Where the old road actually ran? Whether the stakes match the authorized corridor, whether the county maps agree with the deed descriptions." Caleb planted the tripod in the snow. "After that, lawyers and officials decide what the facts mean." Over the following days, Shane helped clear sightlines through brush while Caleb measured. Trevor provided Northline's preliminary route maps after Shane requested them in writing. The maps showed 3 possible access approaches. The route through Frost Lantern Orchard was shortest. A second crossed private timberland and required negotiations with 2 more owners. The third followed a longer maintenance road over Rocky County property. It would require grading, drainage work, and a small engineered crossing. But it avoided the chapel and the oldest apple rows entirely. More expensive did not mean impossible. It meant someone had decided the Dale property was the easiest loss to defend. That night, Shane sat alone in the packing house office while wind moved softly around the eaves. Ash slept on the rug near the stove, one back leg extended to ease the joint. Shane opened his phone. Elaine's voicemail remained saved. He had listened to the first few seconds several times, but never allowed it to finish. Tonight, he pressed play and set the phone on the desk. Her voice entered the small room without accusation. "I know you probably won't call back. I'm not asking for that tonight." There was a pause, filled by the faint sound of traffic wherever she lived now. "I used to think your silence meant you didn't care. Later, I understood you cared so much that you were afraid every honest word would break something." Shane stared at the red survey map spread across the desk. "But understanding it didn't make it easier to live beside," Elaine continued. "You could be sitting 5 feet from me, Shane, and it still felt like you had never come home." The message ended. Ash opened one amber eye. Shane's thumb hovered over the delete icon. For years, deleting things had been easier than answering them. He locked the phone instead. Outside, the red stake stood among the apple trees, visible even in the dark whenever moonlight touched the snow. Shane did not call Elaine, but he did not erase her voice. The fire station had never been designed to hold an argument that large. By 6:30, every folding chair was occupied. Late arrivals stood along the cinder block walls beneath fluorescent lights that flattened every face into shades of fatigue. Wet coats hung from hooks near the entrance, dripping melted snow onto the concrete floor. The room smelled of wool, coffee, diesel, and the faint rubber scent of fire hoses drying in the adjoining bay. Shane sat near the back with Ash at his feet. He had chosen the position deliberately. From there, he could see the 2 exits, the presentation screen, and the entire aisle without becoming part of the room's center. The habit had survived longer than the uniform. Wilma sat beside him in a dark teal dress beneath her pearl gray coat. Her walker was folded against the wall. Roscoe occupied the chair on her other side, his sling removed, but his right arm still held carefully against his ribs. At the front, Trevor Miles adjusted a projector cable for the third time. The map behind him showed Elk River Pass in layers of white, gray, and red. Signal dead zones appeared as wide circles across the mountains. 3 proposed access routes climbed toward the planned communications tower. Trevor waited until the room settled. "This project is not about convenience," he began. "It is about response time." His steel blue shirt was buttoned at the collar, but he wore no tie. The sleeves of his graphite jacket were still damp from snow. He spoke without theatrical confidence, relying instead on numbers. During the previous 5 winters, County Dispatch had documented 27 emergency calls delayed by poor cellular or radio coverage. 4 vehicle accidents had gone unreported for more than an hour. A search team had lost contact while looking for a missing hunter. In one cardiac emergency, the ambulance had driven 11 miles in the wrong direction because the caller could not maintain a connection long enough to confirm the address. Trevor changed slides. A chart compared construction costs and projected completion dates for the 3 routes. The line through Frost Lantern Orchard was shortest and cheapest. The private timber route required agreements with 2 additional landowners. The County Rock route added grading, drainage, and an engineered crossing. Route 1 could be operational before next winter, Trevor said. Route 3 may require another construction season. Roscoe muttered, "Funny how our trees are always the efficient option." Several people turned. Trevor paused but did not respond. A woman in the second row raised her hand before being called on. She was 66, broad-shouldered beneath a camel-colored coat, with iron-gray hair cut in a practical wedge around her face. June Halverson owned the Elk Crest Motor Lodge near the highway, a place with 14 rooms, 9 working heaters, and a neon sign that had been missing the letter C for nearly a decade. "My guests lose signal between the lodge and mile marker 23, she said. "Last February, a couple from Spokane slid into a ditch. The husband walked almost 4 miles before he found enough service to call me." She looked toward Roscoe and Wilma. "I respect what Frost Lantern means to this town, but respect does not tow a car or locate an ambulance." A murmur moved through the room. Roscoe leaned forward. "No one said the tower shouldn't be built." "You've fought the access route for weeks," June replied, "because it cuts past our chapel and takes half the upper windbreak." "It takes trees. It takes land. It uses land for something the entire pass needs." Roscoe stood too quickly. Pain crossed his face, but anger carried him through it. "Easy to volunteer someone else's property." June's expression tightened. "Easy to talk about heritage when your phone works well enough at home." The room sharpened around them. Shane felt Ash raise his head. Glenn Rourke stood near the side wall in his County Road Service jacket, his thick hands folded over the top of a chair. Snow had dried in pale streaks along his boots. "I caught Porter's radio call because I happened to be south of the pass," Glenn said. "If I'd been behind the ridge, I wouldn't have heard him. Our road crews lose contact twice a week up there." Roscoe turned toward him. "So you want the road through my orchard too?" "I want a system that works." "That isn't an answer." "It's the only answer I have." Voices began rising from several corners. Someone asked why the county had neglected the old repeater. Another demanded to know whether Northline had considered leasing helicopter access during construction. A man near the coffee table said tourists had no business driving the pass in storms. June told him emergencies did not check residency before happening. Trevor tried to restore order, but the room no longer belonged to his presentation. Nora Keswick stepped forward. She wore a black turtleneck beneath a wine-colored wool coat, her dark hair tucked behind one ear. She did not take the microphone. She simply stood between the first row and the projector screen until enough people noticed her silence. "Stop," she said. The room quieted unevenly. Nora looked first at Roscoe, then at June, Trevor, and the rest of them. This has become a contest to decide who cares more about human life. No one moved. Northline points to emergency calls. The Dales point to land, history, and the chapel. Both sides describe the other as selfish because that is easier than admitting the problem has a real cost. She nodded toward the map. If this town rejects the Orchard route, then it must help produce another route that can actually be funded, permitted, and built. Not a wish, not a moral statement, a plan. Then she faced Trevor. And if Northline continues with Route 1, the company must explain why saving money justifies placing most of the damage on one household. Trevor held her gaze. That is what the cost comparison explains. No, Nora said. It explains what is cheaper. It does not explain what is fair. The distinction settled heavily over the room. Wilma placed one hand on the arm of her chair. I'd like to speak. Shane unfolded her walker, but she shook her head and stood with one hand resting on the chair back. Her balance had improved, though the effort remained visible in the careful way she planted each foot. Roscoe reached for her elbow. I have it, she said gently. He withdrew. Trevor handed her the microphone. The speaker screamed. A burst of feedback tore through the room, sharp, metallic, sudden. Wilma recoiled. The microphone slipped from her hand and struck the edge of the table. A second hollow clang followed. Her face lost color, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. The pickup groaning in the wind, glass at her shoulder, a seatbelt refusing to release. Shane rose, but Ash moved first. The German shepherd stepped into the aisle and crossed the room without pulling the leash, which Shane had left loose beneath his chair. People shifted aside instinctively. Ash stopped against Wilma's legs. He did not paw her or make a sound. He simply pressed the side of his broad head beneath her trembling hand. Wilma's fingers closed into the fur behind his notched ear. Nora lowered the microphone volume and placed it on the table, rather than returning it to Wilma. The room waited. Wilma stared down at Ash. Her first breath came broken. The second went deeper. By the fifth, her shoulders had begun to lower. Shane remained standing at the rear, close enough to intervene, but far enough to let the moment belong to her. Wilma raised her head. I am not ashamed of that, she said without the microphone. Her voice did not fill the room, so everyone leaned closer. I used to be. I thought fear was something polite people should hide until they got home. She rested one hand on Ash and the other on the table. I remember lying in that truck and wondering whether anyone knew where we were. I remember the signal failing. I remember thinking Roscoe might die beside me because a mountain stood between us and a radio tower. Roscoe looked down. I want the tower built. A faint stir passed through the audience. I want Glenn to reach stranded drivers. I want Nora to know which road an ambulance should take. I want June's guests to call for help without climbing a ridge. June's face softened, though she remained very still. But safety should not begin by choosing the people with the least money, the least legal knowledge, or the least time left to fight, and deciding their loss is efficient. Wilma turned toward Trevor. The cheapest route may still be the wrong route. Trevor did not look away. And the most beloved place, he replied quietly, may still be where the geography works best. Wilma nodded. That is why we need facts instead of fear. No applause followed. Shane was grateful for that. Applause would have turned her words into victory. Nothing had been won. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes. Questions were recorded. Caleb Stroud's preliminary findings were noted, but not treated as a legal conclusion. Trevor agreed to provide engineering estimates for all 3 routes. Nora proposed a smaller working session after the full survey report arrived. No vote was taken. People left in clusters, still divided. June passed Wilma near the door. "I meant what I said about the road," she told her. "I know. I also meant that I respect you." "I know that too." June looked down at Ash. "He available for town council?" "His rates are unreasonable," Wilma said. For the first time that evening, June smiled. Outside, snow had begun falling harder. Glenn stood near his plow truck, speaking into his radio. Shane helped Wilma into Roscoe's pickup, then noticed Nora studying the clouds above the western ridge. "What?" he asked. "The pressure dropped faster than forecast." Glenn walked over, his face grim. "County shop says the north plow blew a hydraulic line. South truck has a transmission problem." "That leaves you," Shane said. "That leaves me for 42 miles. Trevor emerged, carrying his tablet beneath his jacket. "The Weather Service moved the warning forward," he said. "The main band reaches the pass before midnight." Nora checked her phone. "Old repeater has dropped twice since 4. "Backup generator?" Shane asked. "Scheduled for refueling tomorrow?" Glenn gave a humorless laugh. "Storm's got poor respect for scheduling." The first gust drove snow beneath the station awning. Shane looked across the parking lot at the white lines already disappearing beneath their boots. The signs had been there for days. Equipment failures, unstable communications, a front moving down from Canada. None of it was secret. None of it had required prophecy. The danger came from many small weaknesses choosing the same night to matter. By 8:30, Shane had Roscoe and Wilma back at Frost Lantern. Wind struck the farmhouse in long, rising breaths. The lights flickered during supper, steadied, then dimmed again. Ash paced once between the kitchen and front room before lying near Wilma's chair. Roscoe turned on the local weather radio. The announcer warned of freezing rain beneath the snowband, strong enough to coat power lines and trees. Travel over the upper pass was discouraged. A small avalanche warning had been issued near the East Cut. At 9:17, the electricity failed. The farmhouse fell into darkness. The furnace stopped. For a moment, there was only the wind. Shane found the flashlight in his pocket and swept the beam across the room. Wilma remained seated, one hand resting on Ash. Roscoe was already reaching for the oil lamp. "I'll start the generator," Shane said. The backup unit coughed twice before catching. Power returned to the kitchen, the furnace controls, and a few essential outlets. Beyond the windows, the entire valley remained black. Shane's VHF radio crackled. "Nora to Porter. Do you copy?" He lifted it. "Porter here. Multiple outages from Elk Crest to the lower farms. Ice took the main line near Copper Wash. Glenn reports a slide across the east approach." "How large?" "Small enough to clear, large enough that no one is crossing tonight." Static swallowed the next sentence. Then Nora returned. "Repeater backup is down. Generator ran dry." Shane looked toward Roscoe. The old man had heard. Nora continued. "The fire station is on limited power and already near capacity. I need a second warming location." The room went still. Shane glanced toward the dark shape of the packing house beyond the window. It had a wood stove, a small kitchen, running water when the pump had power, and enough open floor for cots. The chapel sat farther uphill, protected by the windbreak. He did not answer for the Dales. Roscoe looked at Wilma. Their disagreement from the meeting seemed suddenly smaller, but not irrelevant. The town had spent the evening arguing over what the orchard owed to public safety. Now public safety was asking to come inside. Wilma spoke first. "Use the packing house." Roscoe's jaw moved once. "And the chapel," he added. "Quiet room and medical overflow." Shane raised the radio. "Nora, Frost Lantern can open the packing house and chapel." "Confirmed. I'll register it as a temporary warming center under county emergency coordination. You handle logistics. I'll handle medical and intake." Shane almost objected. The old impulse rose immediately. Assess everything, control everything, trust only what he could personally verify. Then he looked at Wilma, still recovering. At Roscoe, unable to lift with his right arm. At Ash, old enough now that a night running through snow would leave him hurting for days. This could not become another mission Shane completed alone. "How many people?" he asked. "Unknown. Start with 20. Plan for more." "I'll need cots, fuel, blankets, and a separate area for medication." "I'll send what I can with Glenn." The radio clicked silent. Shane stood in the farmhouse kitchen while ice tapped against the windows like handfuls of thrown gravel. His cabin waited miles above the pass, stocked, quiet, and empty, except for the shape of his own habits. He could have returned there before the road closed. No one would have accused him of cowardice. He had already done more for the Dales than anyone had asked. But Wilma was opening the chapel. Roscoe was offering the building that kept his livelihood alive. Nora was trusting him with people who had nowhere warmer to go. Shane put on his field jacket. "We need to clear the packing house floor," he said. "Roscoe, show me where the stove tools are. Wilma, make a list of food, blankets, and anyone nearby who lives alone." Roscoe stood. "What about Ash?" The dog had already risen, though his right hind leg remained stiff from the long evening. Shane looked down at him. "Ash stays inside until we know what the cold is doing." The dog's ears shifted back in protest. "For once," Shane said, "someone else gets to stand in the weather." Outside, the storm erased the red survey stakes, the road, and every argument the town had carried into the fire station. Inside Frost Lantern, the first lights of the warming center began to come on. The first people arrived at Frost Lantern before Shane had finished unfolding the cots. Glen Rourke's snowplow emerged through the storm with its amber lights rotating against the white dark. Behind it crawled a van from Elk Crest Motor Lodge, followed by 2 pickups carrying blankets, fuel cans, and 7 adults who had lost power along the lower road. The packing house filled faster than Shane expected. It had once been used to sort apples after harvest. Long wooden tables occupied the center of the room, while hooks, scales, and empty produce bins lined the walls. Shane had pushed the equipment aside, leaving a broad section of dry floor near the iron stove. The cold storage rooms remained locked because their ventilation and refrigeration systems made them unsuitable for shelter. He marked separate areas with strips of painter's tape: sleeping cots near the east wall, food and water near the small kitchen, medication beside Nora's intake table, wet coats and boots near the loading doors. The arrangement lasted 11 minutes. A man moved his cot because the stove made his skin itch. A woman objected to sleeping beside the loading doors because the wind sounded like someone knocking. 2 guests from June's motel arrived with a terrier that barked every time Glenn's radio crackled. Someone placed a bag of walnuts beside a woman with a severe nut allergy. Shane stood in the center of it all with a clipboard in his hand. "Cots stay inside the marked section," he said. A gray-haired man wearing 3 sweaters looked down at the blue tape beneath his boots. "Why?" "So we keep the walkway clear. I've been walking around furniture for 70 years. That doesn't make the furniture safer." Across the room, June Halverson dropped a stockpot onto the kitchen counter. "Porter," she called, "your organization is frightening the soup." Shane looked toward her. June had brought 9 motel guests, 2 boxes of canned food, and the attitude of someone who believed usefulness granted temporary permission to criticize everyone nearby. She had removed her camel coat and tied a dish towel over her iron-gray hair. "The soup doesn't have feelings," Shane said. "This one does. It feels underseasoned." Roscoe, seated beside the generator manual, with his healing arm held close, lifted his chin. "She's right. You haven't tasted it. I know her cooking." June pointed a wooden spoon at him. "Keep talking, and you can eat the manual." For a few seconds, laughter moved through the room. It was small, uneven laughter, but it loosened something. Shane looked at the crooked cots, the wet boots, and the dog trembling beneath its owner's chair. None of it resembled an operation he would once have considered orderly. Yet people were warm. That had to count for more than straight lines. Nora arrived 20 minutes later, carrying 2 medical packs and a stack of intake forms inside a waterproof case. Her brick-red rescue parka was crusted with ice along the shoulders. She established a first aid station in the chapel, where the quieter atmosphere would suit older residents and anyone with respiratory problems. Wilma sat at a small table near the entrance, her green cloth notebook open in front of her. "I have 14 people here," Wilma told Nora. 3 use prescription medication. 1 has insulin in the kitchen refrigerator. Mrs. Bell is allergic to walnuts, and Martin Crowley says he is allergic to authority. "Is that medically confirmed?" Nora asked. "He has provided decades of evidence." Nora almost smiled. Wilma had also begun listing residents who lived alone beyond the plowed roads. Some had checked in earlier. Others had not answered their phones before the cellular network failed. Roscoe supervised the backup generator from a stool near the packing house wall. He could not lift the fuel cans, but he knew the old machine well enough to identify every complaint by sound. "That's running rich," he told Shane. "It's running." It can do both. Glenn crouched beside the exhaust housing, listening. "He's right." Shane looked from one older man to the other. "I like this better when neither of you agreed." They adjusted the choke and cleared ice from the exterior vent. The generator steadied. By 10:30, 27 people occupied the orchard buildings. Ash remained in the chapel. When Shane had prepared to leave with Glenn for the first road check, Ash had risen from his blanket and moved toward the door. His right hind leg dragged for half a step before he corrected it. Shane blocked him. "No." Ash looked around his leg. "You're staying." The dog's ears lowered. Shane clipped no leash to his harness. Instead, he removed the harness entirely and guided Ash back to the thick green and cream blanket Wilma had laid near the chapel stove. Ash stood there, refusing to lie down. The old guilt surfaced quickly. For years, Shane had measured loyalty by who followed him into danger. Ash always had. Through smoke, debris, gunfire, and long nights when Shane could not explain what he needed, the dog had remained near him. Now Shane was asking him not to come. Wilma rested one hand against Ash's shoulder. "He can do useful work here." Ash looked toward Shane again. The chapel held 8 older residents, a woman with a sprained ankle, and 2 people whose anxiety had worsened when the power failed. None of them needed a patrol dog. They needed warmth, quiet, and something living that was not afraid of the storm. Shane crouched beside Ash. "Stay with Wilma." This time the command felt different. Not abandonment. Trust. Ash slowly lowered himself onto the blanket. When Shane stepped outside, he did not look back until he reached the packing house door. Through the chapel window, he saw Ash lying beside Wilma's chair, head raised, watching the room. The storm had thickened beyond the buildings. Glenn's plow cleared the narrow orchard road while Shane rode beside him with the county radio. They checked 2 nearby homes, collected an elderly couple whose furnace had stopped, and delivered fuel to a man running a portable heater in his garage. At the 3rd property, a neighbor named Lyle Danner met them in the driveway without a coat. "It's Virgil," he said. "His oxygen machine is on battery." Virgil Ames lived alone in a 1-story house near the Eastern Cut. At 71, he had chronic lung disease and depended on an oxygen concentrator through most of the day. He had spoken at the community meeting in favor of Northline's project, though his voice had been too weak to carry beyond the 3rd row. Inside the house, the battery indicator on his machine showed less than 20%. Virgil sat upright in a recliner, breathing through a nasal tube. His skin had begun to gray around the mouth. "We have a portable cylinder at the fire station," Nora said over the radio, her voice breaking through static. "But the east road is blocked below Copperwash." "Can Glenn approach from the north?" Shane asked. "Slide debris and 2 downed trees?" Lyle stood near the window, wringing his hands. "I can adjust the machine," he said. "I just don't know what setting he needs." Nora attempted to answer, but the old repeater cut her off. Static swallowed half the instructions. Shane tried the channel again. Nothing. Then another voice entered weakly. "Porter, this is Miles." Trevor sounded distant, each word frayed by interference. "Where are you?" Shane asked. "Northline test station above Mason Ridge. Access road drifted shut behind me." Trevor had gone to inspect the temporary field equipment before the storm intensified. He now had a digital construction radio, several battery packs, and an unfinished point-to-point transmitter intended for engineering tests. "It cannot restore cellular service," Trevor said, "but I may be able to create a narrow voice link between the ridge and Frost Lantern." "What do you need?" "A receiving unit with clear elevation. The chapel bell frame may be high enough." Shane looked through Virgil's dark window toward the orchard, barely visible through the snow. Trevor explained the limits. The equipment had to be aligned manually. Ice could disrupt the signal. The batteries might last less than an hour in the cold. It was not a miracle waiting in a box. It was a chance. Shane left Lyle with Virgil and returned to the orchard in Glenn's plow. Nora prepared the receiving unit Trevor had stored in a Northline field case at the fire station. Glenn had collected it before the eastern road became impassable. They carried the case toward the chapel. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. People sat in small groups near the stove. Someone had begun a quiet card game. Ash lay beneath a bench with his head resting on the boot of a widowed teacher named Marlene. He was asleep, not actively comforting anyone, yet 3 people had chosen seats near him. When Shane entered, Ash opened one eye. He did not stand. Relief and disappointment crossed Shane at the same time. Wilma noticed. "He knows you came back," she said. That was all. Shane, Glenn, and Nora took the receiving unit outside. Rather than climbing onto the snow-coated chapel roof, they attached the compact antenna to a telescoping maintenance pole secured beside the bell frame. Glenn steadied the base while Shane adjusted the angle according to Trevor's broken instructions. 2 degrees east, Trevor said through the construction radio. Shane shifted it. "Too far." "You said 2 degrees. "You moved 4. "I moved 2. "The mountain disagrees." Glenn grunted beneath the pole. "You two planning to argue until spring?" The signal came alive as a thin pulse of sound. Nora immediately established contact from the chapel. "Lyle, confirm you hear me." Static. Then Lyle's voice. "I hear you." The link lasted 9 seconds before dropping. They realigned it. This time, Nora delivered clear instructions for reducing Virgil's exertion, checking the tubing, and conserving the concentrator battery without changing the prescribed oxygen flow improperly. She confirmed his condition and coordinated with Glenn. A volunteer on a snowmobile could carry the portable cylinder across the final blocked section. Glenn would clear as far as Copperwash. Lyle would meet the volunteer near the fallen trees. Every part depended on another. Trevor held the ridge link. Nora handled the medical decisions. Glenn opened the road. Lyle stayed with Virgil. The snowmobile volunteer carried the cylinder. Shane kept the connection functioning. No single person saved Virgil Ames. By midnight, Nora received confirmation that the replacement oxygen was flowing and Virgil's color had improved. Inside the chapel, the news traveled quietly from person to person. No applause came. June simply added another pot of coffee to the stove. Trevor reached Frost Lantern after 1 in the morning, riding with a Northline maintenance worker who had managed to approach from the Western Service track. Snow clung to Trevor's hair and jacket. His hands shook when he removed his gloves. Roscoe stood inside the chapel doorway. For a long second, neither man spoke. "You have room at the fire station," Roscoe said. "The western road closed behind us," Trevor replied. Roscoe's expression remained hard. Wilma came from the side room carrying a folded blanket. "This is a warming center?" "I'm aware," Roscoe said. "No," she replied. "You are remembering the building and forgetting the purpose." She handed the blanket to Trevor. "We do not ask people whether they deserve heat." Roscoe looked toward the chapel stove, then stepped aside. Trevor entered. Later, Shane found him beside the packing house generator, checking the battery bank. The storm had quieted enough that they could speak without shouting. "My sister's name was Dana," Trevor said unexpectedly. Shane waited. "She was 29. Her car left a mountain road outside Missoula. She survived the crash." Trevor tightened a connection that did not need tightening. She died before anyone found her. The machinery hummed between them. "That's why the schedule matters," Shane said. "It is why delays feel like negligence." Shane understood the difference and the danger. "Pain can tell you what matters," he said. "It cannot decide what everyone else must give up." Trevor stared at the battery terminals. "The orchard route is cheaper," he said. "Faster, too." "Is it the only workable route?" "No." The answer arrived without defense. Trevor pulled on his gloves. "The County Rock route needs drainage, grading, and an engineered crossing. Northline did not recommend it because the additional cost threatens the current funding window." So the Dales became the affordable answer. Trevor's jaw tightened. That is not how the report phrases it. But it is what the report means. Trevor looked through the packing house window. In the chapel, Roscoe was pouring coffee for a man he had argued with at the meeting. June was distributing soup. Wilma wrote names in her green notebook. Ash remained asleep near the stove, one rear leg stretched awkwardly away from his body. Trevor's expression changed, though not into agreement. Perhaps only recognition. "People like clear villains," he said. "Usually because clear villains ask less of everyone else." The generator continued to run. Beyond the walls, the storm covered the orchard, the disputed road, and every red survey stake beneath the same white weight. Inside Frost Lantern, no one had solved the future of the land. But for one night, the people arguing over what the orchard owed them were alive because its doors had opened. And Shane, moving between the fuel ledger, the sleeping cots, and Nora's radio desk, finally understood that staying did not mean standing guard over everything alone. Sometimes it meant knowing which voice had to reach which pair of hands before the light went out. The storm left Elk River Pass looking newly made and badly wounded. For 3 days, county crews cut through fallen trees and pushed avalanche debris from the eastern road. Power returned in uneven sections, first to the fire station, then the lower farms, then the motel. Frost Lantern remained open as a warming center until the final residents could safely return home. When the last cot was folded, the packing house seemed larger than before. The floor bore muddy boot marks. Empty soup cans filled 2 bins near the kitchen. Someone had left a pair of wool gloves beside the stove, and no one could remember who they belonged to. Shane stood in the doorway while morning light spread across the orchard. The red survey stakes had emerged again as the snow settled. They no longer looked like an invasion. They looked like an unfinished question. Caleb Stroud completed his fieldwork a week later. He arrived carrying a rolled survey map, a metal case, and the weary expression of a man who had spent too many mornings explaining why old property lines did not care about anyone's feelings. Roscoe cleared the kitchen table while Wilma brought coffee. Shane sat near the window with Ash resting at his feet. Caleb unrolled the map. The old timber permit granted temporary access for 18 months, he said. There is no separate recorded document creating a permanent easement along that exact route. Roscoe struck the table once with his left palm. I knew it. Caleb continued as though nothing had happened. However, several later county maps show some form of access line. The symbols were copied inconsistently over the years. One clerk appears to have converted a seasonal track into a solid road marking. Another copied that map without checking the original permit. So Northline cannot use it, Roscoe said. That is not my conclusion. Roscoe leaned back, offended by the persistence of complexity. Caleb pointed to the northern boundary. My survey establishes where the old road physically ran, where the current stakes sit, and how the deed descriptions align with the land. It does not determine whether a court or public authority could authorize a new right-of-way. Wilma studied the map, but it proves the road was never clearly granted forever. It proves the record is unclear, Caleb replied. That matters. It does not end the matter. The distinction disappointed Roscoe. It relieved Shane. A clean victory would have felt suspicious after everything else the mountain had taught them. 2 days later, they met at the county administration building with Mara Bellamy, legal counsel for the Elk River County Communications District. Mara was 51, compact, and dressed in a dark green suit beneath a practical winter coat. Her black hair was cut close around her face, and she wore no jewelry except a plain silver band. She listened with her hands folded and never interrupted unless someone turned an assumption into a fact. Trevor sat across the table with 2 Northline engineers. Nora represented emergency services. Glenn attended for county road operations. June occupied a chair near the end, officially as a business owner and unofficially because she had no intention of allowing the meeting to become too polite. Mara placed Caleb's survey beside the project maps. Northline cannot independently condemn property, she said. Any compulsory access request would have to come through the communications district and comply with county and state procedures. Roscoe looked at Trevor. So you cannot simply take the road. Trevor's expression remained controlled. No one said we could. You implied it often enough. Mara lifted one hand. The district would need to establish that the proposed access serves a public necessity and that the chosen route creates a reasonable balance between cost, feasibility, and harm. She tapped the County Rock route. The existence of an alternative weakens the argument that the Orchard route is necessary. Roscoe began to smile. Mara had not finished. Route 3 also requires additional drainage work, slope stabilization, an engineered crossing over a seasonal wash, and at least one more permitting cycle. The current estimate is $480,000 above Route 1. The smile disappeared. Trevor opened a cost sheet. It may also delay tower activation by 8 to 12 months. Nora looked toward him. And what is the cost of another winter without reliable coverage? That is exactly Northline's concern. Wilma spoke before the meeting could split along familiar lines. What would make Route 3 possible? Trevor looked at her. Additional funding. What else? A revised construction schedule. Access agreements with the county road department, environmental approval for the crossing, a secondary relay location to maintain lower valley coverage. Wilma turned toward Mara. Then why are we discussing only whether the Orchard Road is legal? The room quieted. Because that is the dispute before us, Mara said. It is the narrowest dispute, Wilma replied. Not the most useful one. She opened her green cloth notebook. What if the tower stays on county land? What if construction vehicles use the maintenance road? What if Frost Lantern allows a smaller relay station near the packing house? Roscoe looked at her sharply. On our land? Near the building, not through the chapel grounds. Trevor sat forward. A lower relay could reduce the height requirement at the main site. One of the engineers began sketching on a printed map. Glenn pointed to the maintenance road. County crews can improve the first mile during spring grading. We cannot build the engineered crossing, but we can handle drainage ditches and surface work. June folded her arms. The businesses along the pass could support a grant application. Roscoe stared around the table as the argument began transforming into a plan without asking his permission. You are all volunteering things quickly, he said. Wilma looked at him. So were we the night the power went out. That stopped him. No one at the table had forgotten Frost Lantern's open doors. The working group formed that afternoon. It included the Dales, Northline engineers, Nora, Glenn, Mara, June, Caleb, and 2 county representatives. Shane declined a formal seat until Wilma told him his habit of standing at the back did not make him less involved. You moved half this town into our packing house, she said. I moved cots. You also kept the fuel ledger, communications board, road schedule, and supply list. Nora ran the response. Yes, and you made the pieces reach one another. Shane accepted a seat as logistics advisor. He disliked the title immediately. Over the next month, the third road became less of an idea and more of a collection of difficult numbers. The main tower would sit on the Rocky County parcel. Construction traffic would use the old maintenance road after seasonal grading. A compact relay station could be placed near the packing house, far enough from the chapel and mature apple rows to preserve the site. Northline would provide an emergency communications connection to Frost Lantern if the orchard maintained a safe equipment enclosure and backup power. The county could apply for a rural infrastructure resilience grant to cover part of the engineered crossing. Local contractors offered reduced labor rates for non-specialized work. Glenn proposed scheduling ditch clearing alongside existing spring maintenance. June gathered statements from lodge owners, freight drivers, and residents who depended on reliable emergency communications. The new route remained more expensive. But it was no longer impossible. Northline's regional office rejected the first proposal. Trevor delivered the news during a working group meeting in the packing house. His face looked more exhausted than angry. They consider Route 3 outside the approved cost threshold. June set down her pen. Meaning too expensive. Meaning the current funding agreement may not survive the delay. Roscoe leaned back. Then they can leave. No, Wilma said. Everyone turned toward her. She looked at Trevor. What happens if the company's report says the orchard route is the only viable route? The district will likely continue evaluating compulsory access. And if the report says Route 3 is viable? Trevor's eyes lowered briefly. Northline would have to justify rejecting it on cost and schedule grounds rather than engineering necessity. Mara watched him carefully. That distinction would matter in any public review. Trevor understood what they were asking. Not a favor, not sabotage, accuracy. The room felt smaller. His engineers had already demonstrated that the county route could support construction with modifications. The question was whether Trevor would state that clearly in the internal recommendation, knowing it could cost Northline leverage and place him at odds with his superiors. Roscoe said nothing. Shane recognized the silence. It was the kind that appeared when a decision had already become personal but had not yet been spoken. Trevor closed the folder. I will revise the feasibility section. June studied him. Will you recommend Route 3? I will report that it is technically feasible. That is not the same thing. No, Trevor replied. It is not. His voice held no heroism, only the weight of a man choosing how much truth he could afford. The revised report arrived 11 days later. It stated that the Frost Lantern route remained the lowest-cost option, but it was not the only workable route. The county road alternative could be completed with additional funding, redesigned drainage, and a revised schedule. A lower relay near the packing house could preserve coverage while reducing some construction demands. Northline removed Trevor from Budget Authority the next morning. He remained Regional Project Director in title, but future financial recommendations required approval from the Boise office. Rumors suggested he would be transferred after the review. When Shane heard, Trevor was standing beside the packing house with a clipboard, checking the proposed relay distance from the chapel. "You knew that would happen," Shane said. "I knew it might." "Was it worth it?" Trevor measured the space between two marks before answering. It was accurate. For him, that seemed to be enough. At the next public meeting, June Halverson stood before the same room where she had once supported the orchard route. She wore the same camel coat, but her voice had changed. "I still want the tower built quickly," she said. Nothing about the storm made that need smaller. She looked toward Roscoe and Wilma. But the Dales opened their buildings to people who argued against them. Some of us ate their food, slept under their roof, and used their generator. June paused. "We cannot keep calling this public safety if two people are expected to pay the entire private cost." Her support did not unite the town. Several residents still feared delays. Others distrusted Northline entirely. A few believed the county route was an expensive compromise created to protect sentimental trees. But the discussion had shifted. The question was no longer whether the Dales stood in the way of progress. It was how the community would share the burden of progress. That evening, Shane returned to his cabin for the first time in weeks. Dust had gathered along the windowsill. The rooms were exactly as he had left them, which once would have felt comforting. Now the stillness seemed less like peace and more like a house holding its breath. Ash drank from his old bowl and settled near the stove, stretching his right hind leg carefully behind him. Shane found Elaine's number. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time before pressing call. She answered on the fourth ring. "Shane?" Her voice carried surprise, then caution. "Hi, Elaine?" He had imagined this conversation many times. In those versions, he always found the right words early enough to control what followed. Reality offered no such mercy. "I listened to your message," he said. "I left it weeks ago." "I know." Silence entered the line. Shane looked at his hands. "I used to think not talking kept me from saying something cruel or weak or impossible to take back." Elaine did not rescue him from the pause. He continued, "What it did was leave you alone with everything I refused to name. The war, the nightmares, the anger, the fact that I could sit beside you and still be somewhere you couldn't reach." His throat tightened. "You carried consequences for things you never caused." Elaine breathed quietly on the other end. "I did," she said. No accusation, no comfort either. "I'm sorry." "I believe you." The words hurt more than refusal because they were kind without offering escape. Shane closed his eyes. "I'm not calling to ask you to come back." "I know." I needed to say it without expecting you to fix what happens after. For several seconds, the only sound was the stove. Elaine spoke softly. "I don't hate you, Shane." He pressed his thumb against the edge of the table. "But I have a life now. It took me a long time to build something peaceful. That peace cannot become the reward you receive because you finally opened the door." He nodded before remembering she could not see him. "I understand." "I hope you do." They spoke for another minute about practical things, an insurance document, an old box of photographs, the possibility of mailing it to him. Then Elaine said goodbye. The call ended. Nothing in the cabin changed. The marriage remained over. The years did not return. Shane sat with the phone in his hand, feeling grief without the useful disguise of emergency. In the past, he might have driven until the road disappeared beneath him. He might have opened a bottle he did not even want. He might have worked until exhaustion became silence. Instead, he put on his coat and walked with Ash down to the Frost Lantern Chapel. The moon had turned the snow blue. Ash moved slowly beside him, favoring his right leg after the long day. On the chapel porch, Shane sat on the top step and worked his hand gently around the stiff joint. Ash leaned against his knee. Through the orchard, lights glowed from the packing house where Wilma and June were preparing grant documents. Roscoe's voice rose once in protest over some expense. Glenn laughed. A printer began whining inside. No one applauded Trevor for writing the truth. No one applauded Shane for making the call. The important work had become quieter than that. Shane rested his hand on Ash's back and listened to the ordinary sounds of people continuing after the crisis had ended. For most of his life, he had understood presence as arriving when danger began. Now he was beginning to understand another kind, remaining after the sirens stopped, staying when there was no victory to witness, and doing the next honest thing even when it returned nothing that had been lost. Spring arrived at Elk River Pass without ceremony. Snow withdrew from the orchard in uneven patches, revealing flattened grass, broken twigs, and the red survey stakes that had survived beneath the drifts. For several weeks, meltwater ran along the old maintenance road in silver ribbons, while Caleb Stroud and the county engineers marked drainage channels through the rocky slope. The third route received final approval in April. No one rang the chapel bell. There were signatures, revised budgets, environmental conditions, insurance forms, and a county meeting that lasted 3 hours longer than necessary. Mara Bellamy read every condition aloud. Roscoe complained that government paper multiplied when left unattended. June replied that his own receipts occupied 2 filing cabinets and part of a pantry. By June, road crews began improving the maintenance track across county land. The work moved slowly. Culverts had to be replaced. A seasonal wash required an engineered crossing strong enough for construction vehicles without blocking spring runoff. The main tower site had to be shifted 18 feet after engineers found unstable rock beneath the original foundation point. Shane spent the warmer months between his cabin and Frost Lantern. He had not moved into the orchard, not completely. His cabin still held his books, tools, old photographs, and the deep silence he sometimes needed. But the silence had changed. It was no longer the place he disappeared when another human voice became difficult. It had become simply a place to rest. 3 days a week, he drove down to help coordinate deliveries, maintain equipment, and translate Northline's construction schedules into language Roscoe considered less insulting. Trevor appeared twice each month. After losing budget authority, he had been reassigned to technical oversight. The change placed him closer to the actual equipment and farther from executive meetings, which seemed to irritate and relieve him in equal measure. He and Roscoe continued to argue. "The relay cable crosses my fence line," Roscoe said one July morning. "It passes above the fence line." "That is still crossing. It is 18 feet overhead. Cows can look up. You do not own cows. That is not the principle." Trevor stared at him for several seconds, then moved the cable bracket 6 inches toward the packing house. Neither man called that compromise. By late summer, the tower rose from the county ridge. It did not look beautiful. No one pretended otherwise. Steel rarely improved a mountain's appearance. But the access road curved around the rocky parcel instead of cutting through Frost Lantern's oldest apple rows. The chapel remained untouched beneath its windbreak. Near the packing house, Northline installed a compact relay station inside a weatherproof enclosure painted a subdued green. The equipment connected Frost Lantern to the emergency communications network and included a dedicated radio link for use during outages. The orchard gave up a small rectangle of ground. The community gave up money, labor, time, and the fantasy that a solution could cost no one anything. That difference mattered. During autumn, the old packing house changed again. County inspectors required improved ventilation around the stove, illuminated exit signs, accessible ramps, smoke detectors, and a partition separating the emergency supply area from the kitchen. The floor was sealed. A safer fuel shed was built outside. Folding cots were labeled and stored instead of leaning against whatever wall had room. Frost Lantern did not become a hospital, shelter system, or charity empire. It became something smaller and more believable. 3 neighboring orchards joined the Dales in a winter cooperative. June's Motel contributed linens and temporary rooms when roads remained open. 2 ranch families supplied firewood. Members paid modest annual fees or donated produce, transport, or labor. The county provided a backup generator. Northline supplied communications equipment under the final agreement. Nora secured a rural resilience grant large enough to maintain emergency fuel, replacement batteries, and a confidential list of residents who lived alone or depended on powered medical equipment. Wilma managed the records. Her green cloth notebook evolved into 3 binders, a wall calendar, and a color-coded system that Roscoe claimed violated several natural laws. "You have 5 colors for soup," he told her. "They mean different things. Soup is soup. One is vegetarian. Then it is unfinished soup." June, now officially responsible for the cooperative kitchen during emergencies, heard him from across the room. "You are welcome to cook." Roscoe immediately found somewhere else to be. He spent most autumn afternoons in the workshop making wooden signs. He insisted they were temporary and denied taking pleasure in the work, though each letter was carved carefully and sanded smooth. First aid, chapel warming center, packing house, fuel storage, authorized access only. The last sign read, "Coffee. Use at your own risk." Wilma made him remove it. He moved it inside instead. Shane accepted a part-time position as winter logistics coordinator and equipment caretaker. The title sounded more official than the work felt. Most days involved checking fuel levels, testing radios, updating route maps, and reminding people not to stack cardboard beside the stove. During heavy snow months, he stayed in the small manager's cottage near the orchard entrance. The cottage had 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and windows overlooking the first row of apple trees. He kept the cabin. The choice surprised Roscoe. "You planning to live in 2 places?" "I'm planning to own one and work from the other." "That sounds expensive." "It is." "You should sell the cabin." "No." Roscoe considered this. "Good. I didn't want your junk here year-round." The arrangement suited Shane. He still woke some nights and needed space around him. He still had mornings when conversation felt like another language. Healing had not made him social, cheerful, or suddenly free of the habits built over decades. It had changed what he did next. He answered messages. He returned when he said he would. He told Wilma when he needed a day alone instead of vanishing without explanation. Sometimes Elaine sent him a brief text about the box of photographs or a document they still needed to transfer. Their exchanges were respectful and limited. Shane did not mistake kindness for an invitation. The past remained where it was, but it no longer controlled every door he refused to open. Ash aged through the year in quiet, visible ways. His muzzle turned whiter. He rose more slowly after sleeping. Dr. Meredith adjusted his anti-inflammatory medication and warned Shane that cold mornings would become harder on his right hip. Shane bought a low ramp for the pickup. Ash refused to use it for 2 days. On the 3rd morning, he stood beside the open truck door, looked at the ramp, then looked at Shane with open contempt. "Your dignity is not insured," Shane told him. Ash used the ramp. Wilma sewed him a thicker green and cream bed for the chapel. Roscoe complained that the dog's bedding cost more than his winter coat. Wilma reminded him that Ash listened better. During the first test drill of the new warming center, Shane prepared to check the upper road with Glenn. Ash rose from his bed. His right rear leg trembled once before settling. Shane fastened his own jacket, but did not reach for the harness. "Not today." Ash stepped toward the door. Shane placed one hand against his chest. "You stay." The dog looked past him at Glenn waiting outside. Once Shane would have interpreted that look as a challenge to loyalty. He would have let Ash follow because leaving him behind felt too close to betrayal. Now he understood that devotion without limits could become another form of carelessness. Wilma sat beside the chapel stove, sorting wool socks into boxes. "He can supervise me," she said. Ash turned toward her. "You are both terrible at following instructions," Shane replied. Wilma smiled. "Then he is qualified." Shane closed the door softly behind him. He did not feel guilty. Not in the old way. The first true storm of the second winter arrived in early December. It was not as violent as the one that had cut the valley off the year before, but snow fell steadily for 2 days. The new tower held its signal. Glenn's plow reported road conditions without losing contact. Nora checked on Virgil Ames through the cooperative network before his backup battery fell below half charge. No crisis came. That was the success. The packing house opened as a precaution rather than a desperate response. A handful of residents arrived before dark. 2 older farmers whose road usually drifted shut, a delivery driver unwilling to risk the pass, and 3 guests from June's motel after its boiler began making suspicious noises. June brought soup. Roscoe brought signs no one had requested. Wilma checked names against her list and distributed dry gloves. Trevor arrived shortly before dusk to inspect a signal fluctuation in the relay unit. He and Roscoe spent 20 minutes disagreeing about whether a loose gate latch could cause vibration near the cable housing. "It cannot," Trevor said. "It does. It is 14 feet away. Vibration travels. Not with personal motives." Roscoe tightened the latch anyway. The signal stabilized 10 minutes later because Trevor replaced a faulty connector. Neither mentioned this. Inside the chapel, Wilma was carrying a tray when a gust slammed loose sheet metal against the side of the fuel shed. The sudden bang crossed the yard. She stopped. Her fingers tightened around the tray. Her breath caught. For an instant, the room seemed to narrow around her. Ash raised his head from his bed. He did not stand immediately. Wilma closed her eyes and placed the tray on the nearest bench. She touched the small bell pendant at her throat, named the things she could see, and counted her breathing as Dr. Meredith had taught her. Only then did Ash rise. He came to her slowly and leaned his shoulder against her leg. Wilma rested one hand on his head. "I was getting there," she whispered. Ash looked up at her. "I know. You helped anyway." The moment passed without announcement. No one rushed across the room. No one praised her for being brave. Wilma picked up the tray and continued toward the packing house with Ash walking beside her. The second winter did not erase the first. It simply proved that fear could return without being allowed to rule the entire day. The following morning dawned clear. Snow lay over the orchard in smooth blue-white fields. Every bare apple branch held a thin line of frost, and the tower on the distant county ridge caught the first light. Shane stepped onto the manager's cottage porch, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, though only one was for drinking. He often brought the second out by habit, then remembered Ash had no interest in coffee, and Roscoe had strong opinions about Shane's brewing. Ash lay beneath the porch roof on his thick mat, silver muzzle resting on his paws. Snow dusted the outer edge of his black saddle, where the wind had reached him. "You have a bed inside," Shane said. Ash opened one eye. "So do I." The dog closed it again. Across the orchard, lights came on inside the packing house, one window at a time. Glenn's truck arrived carrying split firewood. June followed with bread and a metal coffee urn. Nora parked near the chapel and began unloading medical packs for the monthly inventory check. Roscoe stepped outside, wearing his faded apple cap, and immediately directed everyone toward places they had already intended to go. No emergency had brought them. They had simply agreed to be there. Wilma walked to the chapel door. She no longer used the walker, though a polished wooden cane rested in one hand on icy mornings. Above her hung the small bronze bell, suspended in its wooden frame. Roscoe had replaced the old frayed rope with a smooth wooden handle. Wilma pulled it once. The bell sounded across the yard. It was not loud enough to cross the valley. It did not roll over the mountains like a divine announcement. Its clear note traveled only through the orchard, past the frosted trees, the packing house, and the manager's cottage. Yet Shane heard it. He looked toward the chapel. For much of his life he had imagined forgiveness as a verdict, something declared after sufficient suffering, courage, or sacrifice. He had treated pain like a debt that might eventually be paid if he remained alone long enough. A year at Frost Lantern had not absolved him. It had not returned his marriage, erased the men he had lost, or transformed silence into something harmless. But he had learned that a man could remain unfinished and still become useful in honest ways. He could answer a ringing phone. He could keep fuel dry. He could repair a generator before anyone needed it. He could tell someone he would return and then return. He could open a door before the person outside had to beg. Ash stood slowly. His rear leg took a moment to straighten. Shane waited instead of pulling him forward. When the dog was ready, he crossed the small distance and leaned his shoulder against Shane's thigh. On the county ridge, the communications tower continued blinking steadily against the morning sky. The road leading to it curved over the rocky parcel, far from the chapel and the old apple rows. Behind Shane, the packing house door opened. Warm light spread across the snow. Voices carried from inside, June objecting to Roscoe's coffee sign, Glenn asking where to stack the wood, Nora requesting the updated medication list, Wilma laughing at something none of them could hear clearly. Shane looked once toward the road that climbed back to his cabin. Then he turned away from it. He rested a hand between Ash's ears and walked toward the light with him. Sometimes the right road is not the shortest one. It is the road that asks everyone to carry part of the cost, protects what cannot be replaced, and still leaves room for progress. Shane, Wilma, Roscoe, and even Trevor learned that doing what is right rarely requires a perfect person, only someone willing to choose honesty over convenience. In everyday life, we may never face a mountain storm or a disputed orchard. But we will all face moments when someone else's loss would make our own path easier. May God give us the wisdom to notice and the courage to choose a better road. Tell us what this story meant to you in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, grace, and quiet courage. May peace find your home, and may you never have to face the cold alone.